Okay, today we're talking about adding integers. This is Chapter 2, Lesson 2. It says the equation -2 plus -3 equals -5 is an example of adding two integers with the same sign. Notice the sign of the sum is the same as the sign of the addends. So the addends are -2 and -3, and they're saying that the sum, -5 here, carries that same sign, that negative sign in front. Okay? So we'll add integers using a number line. Here it says find -1 plus -5. So the first step that we do is we start at 0. So find 0. The second step that we do, it says move 1 unit to the left. So I'm going to move 1 unit to the left to represent my -1. Okay? And then the next step says from there, move 5 more units to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I move to the left because I know that I have a -5. So the answer to my expression is -6. Okay. This example suggests a rule for adding integers with those same signs. So remember, it's when you are adding integers. We'll get to subtracting integers and things like that. So adding integers with the same sign, it says to add integers with the same sign, add their absolute values. The sum is positive if both integers are positive, and it's negative if both integers are negative. So here you need to write these examples down. It says you're adding, remember, and it says -2 plus a -4. Well, here I just would take the absolute value of -2 and the absolute value of -4, and what that's telling me is I add those sums together. So I get 2 and 4, and if I add those together, remember you use the same sign in your sum, so I get a -6. Over here to the right, I have 8 plus 1. Well, everyone in here should know you're still going to carry that same sign. Really, this is a +8 and a +1, and 8 plus 1 is 9. Okay. Example 2 says adding integers with the same sign. So let's take a look at what we're supposed to do. We have -3 plus -6. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to add -3, or the absolute value, excuse me, of -3 and the absolute value of -6. Since both of those integers are negative, the sum of those also have to be negative. Okay, so you can automatically come here and put a negative sign in for your sum. I know that the absolute value of -3 is 3, and the absolute value of -6 is 6. And when I add those two together, I get 9 for my answer. So I get a -9. If I go ahead and check my work here, I can see that it's correct. It says to add integers with different signs, you can also use a number line. So you're going to kind of go along the same concept here. So if we add 6 plus a -3, again, the first step we're going to do is start at 0. Then step 2 says move 6 units to the right. Because we have a +6 here, we move 6 to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we're also adding a -3. So the last step from there would be to move 3 units to the left to represent that -3. So I start here and I go back 1, 2, 3. And that's how we come up with a +3. Down here on B, it says 1 plus a -4. So I start again at 0 for my first step. Step 2, I move 1 unit to the right to represent that +1. And then my third step is to move 4 units to the left to represent the -2, 3, and 4, the -4, leaving my answer as a -3. Okay. These examples suggest a rule for adding integers now with different signs. So we know with same signs, we carry the same sign into our sum. Okay? When we add integers with different signs, we have to subtract their absolute values, and the sum is positive if the positive integer's absolute value is greater. So I'll explain what that means in a second. And then it is negative if the negative absolute integer's value is greater. So what does that mean exactly? If I have 9 plus negative 4, I take the absolute value of 9 and the absolute value of negative 4, and I know that I'm going to subtract their absolute values. Okay, it's really important that you get that down. So looking here, I know that the absolute value of 9 is 9, and I know the absolute value of 4 is 4, okay? And because 9 is greater than 4, I take a look back at the original number inside of those absolute value bars, and because it is positive, I know my answer then is going to be a positive number, okay? So then I just take 9 and I subtract 4 from it, and I get a positive 5. All right, looking over at this example, I'll write it over here. Again, I'm going to take the absolute value of negative 9, and I have to subtract the absolute value of 4 from that. Well, here I know the absolute value of negative 9 is 9, and I'm subtracting the absolute value of 4. Now, because 9 is greater, let me get rid of that first. Because 9 is greater than 4, I look back at my 9 again. I can see that it is a negative integer, so I know that my answer is automatically going to be a negative number. So now again, I take the absolute value, which was 9, I subtract the absolute value of 4, which was 4, and 9 minus 4 gives us 5. So the answer is a negative 5. Okay. So in our next example here, we need to add integers with different signs. Let's practice how to do that. I'm going to go ahead and write a up here, and because I'm adding integers, a positive one and a negative one, I take the absolute value of 12, and I subtract the absolute value of negative 6, okay? When I do that, I know the absolute value of 12 is 12, minus the absolute value of negative 6 is 6, and because 12 is greater than 6, okay, I know that I'm going to follow this sign. So I know my answer is going to be positive, but 12 minus 6 gives us 6. So 6 would be the answer here. This just kind of breaks it down for you, if you can see that under my writing there, and shows you exactly what I just showed you with the absolute values. Then moving on to B, we have the absolute value of negative 7. Again, we have a negative, and we are adding a positive to it. So the absolute value of negative 7 minus the absolute value of 5. Again, I go ahead and I solve it for the absolute value, so I get 7 minus, and this should be a plus, you only subtract when you're adding integers of opposite signs. So it would be 7 minus the absolute value of 5 is 5, and we know that 7 minus 5 is 2. Now the question is it a positive 2 or a negative 2? Well, because 7 is greater than 5, I follow the 7 symbol, which is a negative, and I know my answer has to be negative 2. Okay? And that again goes ahead and breaks it down for you. Okay. Looking over here at the real world example, it says a blue whale was at a depth of 275 feet below the surface of the water. So below really means it's going to be probably negative. After 10 minutes, it rose 194 feet. So now it's rising 194 feet. It says, what is the current depth of the blue whale? Write an addition equation and then solve it. So, in words, we need that beginning depth, which was negative 275 feet, plus, well, we're increasing that after 10 minutes, and we're increasing to 194 feet. They're here telling you right now, we're going to let D represent that current depth. So I should have negative 275 plus 194, and then that has to equal D. So to solve that equation, again, I know that I have a negative, I'm adding a positive to it. So let's take the absolute value of negative 275, and let's add that to the absolute value of 194, okay? Well, here I know that because I'm adding different signs, I'm really actually going to subtract them. So I get the absolute value of negative 275 is 275, plus the absolute value of 194 is 194. So I know that's going to equal, let's see, what does that equal? 75, what is that? 81, excuse me, 81. Okay, now the question is it positive or negative? Well, because I know 275 is greater than 194, I follow what's inside of that absolute value sign, 275. So I know that it's going to be negative 181. And because it's asking for the depth, and the depth is in feet, I label my unit feet. So negative 81 feet. And this, again, just kind of explains everything to you that I had just reiterated. Okay. All right, so the next thing we'll talk about is adding more than two integers. It says the integers negative 4 and 4 are an example of opposite integers. Opposites are two numbers with the same absolute value, so the same distance away from 0, but they have different signs. An integer and its opposite are also called additive inverses. So take a look here. It says the sum of any number and its additive inverse is 0. Okay, so we know that anytime you've got a positive 2 and you're adding a negative to it, you're always going to negative 2 to it, you're always going to get 0 as your answer. Shows you what it is in symbols. I recommend jotting that down. And it says this property will be useful when adding 2 or more integers. Okay, so let's take a look. It says find each sum. So right now I have negative 6 plus negative 15 plus 6. So here the first thing they do is they rearrange our expressions so that they use the commutative property and place the 6's next to each other. So you really have negative 6 plus 6. Well, we know based off of what we were just told in that key concept that that equals up to 0. So I really come up with 0 plus negative 15 by that additive inverse property, okay? Which leaves me then with negative 15 as my answer because of that identity property of addition. Any number plus 0 is going to give you whatever that number was. Taking a look at B here, again, they go ahead and they just rearrange everything so that way they've got the positives next to each other and the negatives next to each other. Okay, so you're adding 2 positives and 2 negatives essentially. They use that commutative property of addition. Then they go ahead and they use the associative property to isolate them because right now I'm adding same signs, so it's easier to add the same signs together. So I know 7 plus 26 is going to give me 33. And I have to add that to, well, a negative, because if I'm taking a negative and I'm adding another negative to it, I know that the result is going to be a negative. So 1 plus 13 gives us 14. So realistically, I'm taking negative 1 and adding that negative 13, excuse me, to get negative 14. Now if I take a look, the next step I have to do, I'm adding opposites. This is a positive and this is a negative. And when I add opposites, I take the absolute value. So I have 33 and I subtract them. So 33 minus the absolute value of negative 14. I take a look, I get 33 minus 14. And because I know right now 33 minus 14 is 19, I know that 19 is going to be incorporated in my answer somehow, but the question of whether it's positive or negative is still up for grabs. Because 33 is greater than 14, I know already that my answer has to be positive because 33 is positive. So 19 is the correct choice.